Hello everyone. Welcome to realistquill. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? I'm a 32-year-old veteran, using my GI Bill to get through college in one of the mountain time zone states. Between classes and work, my social life has shriveled to almost nothing. Dating apps became my lifeline to human connection. When I matched with this gorgeous woman around my age, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We scheduled a date at a bar-restaurant, neutral territory, easy drive for both of us. When she walked in, my heart skipped a beat. She was even more stunning in person, and we clicked immediately. During our conversation, she mentioned working as a receptionist at the local police station. Nothing unusual there. But then she mentioned her roommate being away for the holidays, adding with a strange vulnerability in her voice that she hated being alone because of her stalker ex-boyfriend. A warning bell chimed softly in my head. That sounds pretty serious, I said, concern evident in my voice. She waved her hand dismissively, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "Oh, he's harmless," she assured me. Something felt off, but her smile was intoxicating, and I pushed my concerns aside as we continued talking. The chemistry between us was undeniable. After another hour and a couple of drinks, she leaned forward, her perfume momentarily clouding my judgment. "Why don't we go back to my place?" she suggested, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. My body responded before my brain could intervene. Who was I to argue with an invitation like that? When she insisted on driving, claiming she'd seen too many DUIs at work, I tried to protest. "I only had 2 gin and tonics. I'm completely fine to drive." "I insist," she said firmly, leaving no room for debate. That should have been another red flag, but I was too distracted by anticipation to care. When we arrived at her house, she simply pushed the door open. No key, no unlock. For someone supposedly worried about a stalker, she seemed astonishingly casual about home security. As she moved toward the kitchen to feed her cat, my eyes landed on a bowl of cereal on the counter. The milk was still white, the cereal maintaining its crunch. It hadn't been sitting there long. "Whose cereal is this?" I asked, my voice suddenly tight. She hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Oh, I had it as a snack before heading out." Before I could process this obvious lie, she pressed her body against mine, her lips finding mine with practiced precision. Her hands wandered suggestively as she whispered, "Take me to my bedroom." My body and brain were at war. She was gorgeous, and the attraction was overwhelming. But something felt deeply wrong. Still, I followed her to the bedroom. The cereal temporarily forgot. We were getting intimate when she suddenly gasped, her eyes fixed on the window behind me. I spun around to see a hooded figure peering in before darting away. The unmistakable sound of footsteps pounded across her back deck. Adrenaline surged through me as I leapt up, racing to check the door. The front door was unlocked, just as we'd left it. I locked it immediately, and seconds later, someone began pounding on it from outside. I prepared to confront whoever it was, but she grabbed my arm. "Just come back to bed," she urged, her voice strangely calm. "He does this sometimes. He'll go away." I stared at her in disbelief. "You know that's your ex out there." The pounding had moved to the side of the house now, but her expression remained unperturbed. "Don't worry about it," she said, attempting to pull me back toward the bedroom. Something snapped inside me. The unlocked door, the fresh cereal, her complete lack of concern about an intruder. It all painted a disturbing picture. What the hell is going on? I demanded, my voice rising. The door was unlocked. That cereal is fresh, and you're not even slightly concerned about someone stalking outside your windows. Her answers were vague, disconnected from reality. My mind raced with horrible possibilities. Was this a setup for a robbery? Some twisted sexual fantasy involving her ex? Fear and anger collided inside me. If this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I warned, I promise I'll kill you both. I'm not a violent person. But terror had taken the wheel. Without taking my eyes off her, I ordered an Uber on my phone. I kept her talking, trying to understand what was happening while positioning myself near the door. When the notification pinged that my ride had arrived, I bolted out without another word, sprinting to the waiting car. As we pulled away, I glanced back. She stood framed in the doorway, watching me with an expression I still can't decipher. It's been over a month, and I still have no idea what I narrowly escaped that night. Was it a robbery? Some bizarre sexual scenario involving her and the ex? I reported her dating profile and warned the bartender about her, but the questions haunt me. 9 years in the Navy, and I walked straight into what could have been a deadly trap. Whatever sick game they were playing, I'm thankful I trusted my instincts enough to get out when I was driving home from work last night when a sedan cut me off with shocking recklessness. We were on a 2-lane road. I was in the left lane where I belonged for faster traffic. This car made a right turn at an intersection, but instead of turning into the completely empty right lane, they swerved directly in front of me. I tried to maintain my speed by moving into the right lane to pass them, but they cut me off again. Annoyed, I flashed my high beams briefly. A universal what the hell signal. I successfully moved back to the left lane and passed them, but within seconds they were tailgating me aggressively. As I approached my turn, I moved from the left to the right lane, preparing to make a right at the upcoming intersection. Suddenly, the car swerved from the middle lane where they should have continued straight, and followed me through the right turn. Alarm bells started ringing in my head. After the turn, they were still right behind me. At the approaching red light, I switched to the right lane at the last second, hoping to shake them. Instead of stopping, I impulsively veered through a parking lot shared by a bank and a bar. My pursuer followed, staying right on my tail. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized this wasn't random road rage. I was being deliberately hunted. I reached for my pocket knife for protection, only to remember it was in the laundry basket at home. I need to lose this guy before heading home, I thought, weaving through the empty parking lot with the car still in pursuit. I was about to turn left when I heard a loud pop. My first thought was they'd thrown something at my car. Then I saw it. A nearly perfect circular hole in my windshield. The reality hit me like a sledgehammer. They had just fired a gun at me. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone, held the button for the automated assistant, and yelled, "Call 911. The person behind me has put a bullet hole through my car." I sped past my apartment complex, not wanting to reveal where I lived, and pulled into another bank parking lot, with plenty of security cameras. Within minutes, police cars arrived. I got out with my hands up, showing I was unarmed. When I could finally examine my car, what I saw made my blood run cold. The bullet had entered through the trunk, passed through the back seat, grazed the top left shoulder of the passenger seat, and exited through my windshield. 6 inches to the right and that bullet would have torn through my shoulder. 6 inches higher and I wouldn't be alive to tell this story. The day after this terrifying event, I received a call from the investigator assigned to my case. He asked to recover the bullet, which seemed impossible given it had passed completely through my car. I agreed to come in for forensic ballistics work the following evening. When I arrived at the station, I waited an hour before learning the investigator wasn't there. Later that night at work, he called to apologize. "I don't know if you heard the news," he said, "but there was another shooting last night at 8 p.m. I'm working that case too, and it actually has everything to do with you." He explained that a drug deal had gone wrong at a nearby gas station, and the vehicle identified in my case had been seized as evidence in this second shooting. Just 22 hours after someone in that car had tried to kill me. I changed my license plate first thing Monday morning, not wanting any connection to these violent events. The bullet, I learned, was a high-velocity rifle round that traveled in a perfectly straight line through my entire vehicle. If it had hit me, even just in the shoulder where it passed through the passenger seat, the trauma would have been devastating. Every day, I think about those 6 inches that separated me from death, and how a random road encounter nearly ended my life. The randomness of it all still haunts me. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong person to flash my lights at. The memory surfaced while watching videos with my girlfriend about how you likely walk past dozens of murderers in your lifetime without ever knowing. It reminded me of an interaction I had last year with someone who later turned out to be an attempted murderer. I was attending a small family gathering at my aunt's house for her birthday. My aunt works as a nurse at a hospital about 2 hours away, and during her time off she invited family over for dinner and cake. She mentioned she'd also invited a coworker named Kate and her son Chad to join us. The moment Chad walked into the room, something felt wrong. I know that sounds cliché, but I've always been highly attuned to the energy people bring with them. There was a heaviness around him that made my skin prickle. They seemed nice enough during introduction. Kate stayed in the kitchen helping with food preparation, while Chad wandered out to the back deck where my mom, brother, uncle and my uncle's sister Tammy were sitting. Tammy is what you'd call an open book, sharing every detail of her life with anyone willing to listen. Her romantic exploits are usually her favorite topic, and my mom enjoys these conversations, finding common ground in their shared interests. Chad positioned himself in the circle, interjecting frequently to redirect the conversation back to himself. His eyes would light up whenever someone asked him a question, his hunger for attention almost palpable. I participated minimally, choosing instead to observe his behavior from the sideline. When Tammy began ranting about a married man who'd promised to leave his wife for her, something shifted in Chad's demeanor. His posture straightened, his eyes narrowed with intense focus. When Tammy mentioned wanting to confront the man at his home, Chad leaned forward. "What's his address?" he asked, a dangerous eagerness coloring his voice. "I can show up for you." A chill ran down my spine. While others laughed it off as a joke, I saw something genuine in his expression that disturbed me deeply. The evening continued without further incident, but Chad's reaction stayed with me. After the party, my mom confessed, sharing my unease about him. "Something's not right with that boy," she whispered. It wasn't until nearly a year later that my blood ran cold when my aunt called with disturbing news. Chad was serving a prison sentence for the attempted murder of a 17-year-old girl. The details were horrific. Chad had been walking the teenage girl home when he violently attacked her, slashing her throat and stabbing her in the side, causing a 6-centimeter laceration to her liver and a 4-centimeter wound to her diaphragm. He left her for dead, but miraculously, she survived and testified against him. Despite pleading not guilty, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The judge noted his complete lack of remorse or accountability. Evidence revealed text messages to a friend weeks before the attack, claiming the girl was corrupt and needed to be put down. Kate, Chad's mother, denied her son's guilt and eventually left her job at the hospital. What's most disturbing is the timeline. Chad had already committed this brutal attack 2 years before my aunt's party. The case simply hadn't gone to trial yet. While I sat across from him, watching him interact with my family, he had already attempted to take a teenage girl's life in one of the most vicious ways imaginable. I still get chills thinking about it. The darkness I sensed in him wasn't just my imagination. It was the shadow of what he had already done. This happened when I was so young, between 1 and 2 years old, that I have no personal memory of it. The story has been passed down through my family, a dark chapter we rarely discuss. My mom, my sister, and I were visiting my aunt's house. We were playing in the front yard when my mom said she needed to grab something from inside. She left my sister, only 5 or 6 years old herself, to watch me for what was supposed to be just a moment. When my mom returned, I was gone. The panic was immediate and all-consuming. My uncle jumped in his car and drove frantically around the neighborhood. He had a suspicion about who might have taken me, a man he knew lived nearby. He pounded on this man's door repeatedly, receiving no answer despite being certain someone was inside. My aunt talked him out of breaking down the door, and they returned home to call the police. When officers arrived, they patrolled the area and found me several blocks away, standing alone outside the very house my uncle had identified. I was unharmed but confused, a toddler who had only recently learned to walk, somehow appearing multiple blocks from where I disappeared. The theory is that when the kidnapper heard police sirens approaching, he panicked and simply left me outside to be found, knowing a baby my age couldn't possibly have wandered that far on my own. No arrests were ever made. The police didn't even question the man my uncle suspected. What haunts my family isn't just that I was taken, but how easily it happened in broad daylight, in a familiar neighborhood, in the span of mere minutes. And what haunts me is knowing how differently this story could have ended. I was one of the lucky ones, returned before anything worse could happen, too young to remember the trauma. But somewhere in my subconscious, perhaps the memory remains, a shadow I'll never fully understand. About 2 weeks ago, I booked an Airbnb in another country for a concert. The room was cheap, but I figured for one night, all I needed was a bed. My trip started off with a hiccup when my data roaming didn't work. I had to plan my route at a cafe with Wi-Fi and thankfully made it to the address on time. I rang the only bell and waited and waited. After 5 minutes of repeated ringing, I peered through the mail slot. What I saw chilled me to the bone. The entrance looked like an abandoned barn. A dust-covered couch directly in front of the door. Furniture draped in aged cloths and an oppressive layer of grime everywhere. This didn't look like a house prepared for guests. It looked like a time capsule from decades past. As I stood there debating what to do, an elderly, unwashed-looking man shuffled toward the door from the street. I asked if he knew where the Airbnb was, and he mumbled something I took as confirmation. When I asked if he was Tim, my host, he nodded and opened the door. The interior was even worse than I'd glimpsed. A creaky, ancient staircase dominated the entrance hall. I followed him upstairs, trying to ignore his labored breathing, cigarette stench, and hacking cough. The second floor was a nightmare, dark, cluttered with shrouded furniture, and divided by a heavy curtain, concealing something I couldn't quite see. Another staircase led to my hallway, which looked straight out of a horror film set, cracked walls adorned with eerie rural paintings and crosses. Being a goth, I usually appreciate dark aesthetics, but this was different. Everything felt neglected, decaying, wrong. The bathroom he showed me had a gaping hole in the bathtub tiling. The bedroom, while somewhat acceptable, was decorated with unnervingly lifelike dolls staring down from shelves. When I asked about Wi-Fi, he said they didn't have any, crushing my hopes of communication with the outside world. When I inquired about checkout time, he cryptically answered, "It doesn't matter," before disappearing up to the completely darkened 4th floor. Preparing to change, I made a horrifying discovery. There were no locks on any doors, not the bathroom, not the toilet, not my bedroom. The bathroom shelves displayed half-used toiletries, looking like they'd been abandoned by previous guests. A shower gel here, a toothbrush there, even a random eyelash curler. My mind spiraled with dark scenarios. What if all these items belonged to people who never left? Why weren't there any negative reviews? Had no one survived to write them? I decided I couldn't stay the night. I debated taking all my belongings to the concert, but didn't want to lug my heavy backpack around. I took only essentials and slid a folded paper under my door, a makeshift alarm to reveal if anyone entered during my absence. Coming down the stairs, I heard someone unlocking the front door. My heart stopped. The advertisement had mentioned a couple lived there, so I expected to see the old man's wife or girlfriend. Instead, a middle-aged man walked in and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Tim." My blood froze. If this was Tim who was the old man upstairs. I managed some brief small talk before escaping to the concert, which thankfully was worth all the stress. Afterward, exhaustion overcame my fear, and I checked into a hostel with blessed amenities like Wi-Fi, a proper shower, and doors that locked. The next morning, I returned for my belongings. Peering through the mail slot again, I nearly screamed. The old man was asleep on the couch directly in front of the entrance, now inexplicably wearing a Snorlax Pokemon onesie and hooked up to an oxygen tank, the line running to his nose. I had to sneak past him to retrieve my things. Upstairs, I found my door slightly ajar despite my paper trap. Worse, the eyelash curler now carried the distinct burned hair smell of recent use. I grabbed my stuff and tried to silently bolt for the exit. In my haste, I accidentally tripped over the old man's oxygen tubes, ripping them from the tank. A loud hissing filled the room and the man woke up instantly, gasping desperately for air. Panic overwhelmed me. I stammered apologies while backing toward the door, then turned and ran as fast as I could. To this day, I'm not sure if I overreacted, but everything about that place felt wrong. The two different Tims, the missing locks, the used personal items, the entered room. In the best case scenario, it was just a weird, poorly managed Airbnb. In the worst case, well, I prefer not to think about what might have happened had I stayed then. My encounters with Ben began in November 2024 at school. He was friends with Tom, and eventually became part of our friend group. I'd always found Ben a bit off-putting, which seemed to be the consensus among our classmates. Once we began regularly socializing, I started feeling guilty about these assumptions. That changed when we were added to a WhatsApp group chat together. First came the constant, mindless images of gore pictures involving torture victims and murdered children. I don't know if the images were real, but they made me deeply uncomfortable. When I asked him to stop, he told me to take a joke and stop being a baby. Then he started sending messages claiming he had killed a cat, alongside disturbing fantasies involving people we knew. My other friends dismissed this as typical edgelord behavior, but something about it felt more sinister. One Saturday, while Christmas shopping alone in town, I noticed Ben standing down the road, staring directly at me. I waved awkwardly, but he maintained his unblinking gaze before casually walking into a side street. For the remainder of my shopping trip, he seemed to materialize wherever I went, always at a distance, always watching. Eventually, I abandoned my shopping and went home. When I texted him about it, he denied knowing what I was talking about. Later, during lunch at school, Ben and another friend, Jack, convinced me and Zach to follow them into the forest behind our school. As we ventured deeper into the woods, Ben's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started laughing to himself and repeating "closer, closer" in a sing-song voice. The atmosphere grew so unsettling that Zach and I decided to head back. Ben seemed angered by our decision. When we asked why they wanted us to continue deeper into the forest, Ben said he wanted to set a fire and show us something. After that incident, I distanced myself and left the group chat, though I was eventually re-added. During my absence, something horrifying happened. Ben attacked Tom at school with a homemade blade fashioned from a pencil sharpener razor. Tom suffered a wound near his wrist, and Ben was expelled, though no legal action followed. When I returned to the group chat, I discovered Ben had been sending graphic photos of self-harm and disturbing rants about hating his family. I can't shake the feeling that Ben is dangerous. His behavior during our encounters in town and in the forest keeps replaying in my mind. Sometimes I worry that he knows where I live and is not far away. Am I overreacting? Or should I be genuinely concerned about what he might be capable of? The term delusion refers to a strong, consuming belief in something untrue. Religious delusions involve beliefs concerning religious ideologies or figures. Psychosis refers to a collection of symptoms affecting the mind, where there has been some loss of contact with reality. Forgive me if this post seems scattered. I'm on my third glass of wine, contemplating the unraveling of my relationship with my brother, Brian. We grew up incredibly close. Movie nights, family dinners, game nights, holidays, road trips. Normal sibling stuff. We eventually grew into our 20s and moved away from home, but stayed connected through texts and online gaming. Then Brian changed. Dramatically. Overnight, he suddenly became extremely religious. Not in a healthy finding faith kind of way, but in an obsessive, all-consuming manner that alarmed everyone who knew him. No one in our family is particularly religious, and Brian never had religious friends before. Yet he found a church in his new city that he began giving his life to. He's secretive about which church it is. He spends all his time there late nights cleaning up and attending every function. The only friend he mentions is the priest. The only media he consumes is religious content. He took a missions trip to Mexico that he refuses to discuss in detail. Every conversation now ends with him asking if I'm ready to give my life to God or suffer in hell. Recently, he visited our family home. My mother said the experience was deeply unsettling. He sat in silence much of the time, observing rather than participating. When he looked at her, his eyes seemed empty, distant. His energy felt wrong, cold, and removed. The bubbly, affectionate brother we knew had vanished, replaced by this detached stranger. For months, our one connection remained our monthly video game session. We'd play for hours, our old rapport briefly resurfacing. During our last session, we played until 2 a.m., laughing like old times. A week later, I discovered he'd given his console away to a church member. When I confronted him about it, his explanation chilled me to the bone. He'd given it away because his future wife, a premonition, not an actual person, wouldn't like him playing with other girls. He would be completely cutting me off because this imaginary future wife was more important than his relationship with me. He spoke with such clarity, such conviction in this delusion, that I felt physically ill listening to him. Later, our father called him with a devastating question. Do you need to cut your sister off because you feel for her in another way than as your sister? Brian avoided answer. I'm losing sleep over this. Is my brother in a cult? Is he experiencing religious psychosis? Has our relationship been destroyed because of possible inappropriate feelings toward me? What kind of church encourages cutting off family? He claims he'll be moving overseas soon to find this premonition wife. I vacillate between wanting to understand what's happening and wanting to respect his desire for distance. My mother believes this is his way of removing temptation, meaning me, from his life. I'm mourning what was once our relationship while trying to comprehend this bizarre transformation. All I can think of is a quote I once read: "The more devout they are, the uglier their faith will become, since it's all based on a lie." Last summer, I was almost kidnapped while walking around my neighborhood. I usually enjoy these walks, sometimes biking, but mostly on foot. The evening was pleasant, and I had my headphones in, lost in music. When a car pulled up beside me, since I was near someone's house, I initially assumed the driver was arriving home. I was wrong. For context, I'm petite, 5'1" and 1,115 pounds. The man who stepped out of the car towered over me at around 6'3" and nearly 180 pounds. "Hey, where you headed?" he asked casually. "Just walking around," I responded curtly, hoping my tone would discourage further conversation. "It's pretty late," he observed, his eyes never leaving me. "You want me to give you a ride home?" "No thanks," I said firmly. "I don't live in this area." As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted revealing even that small detail. His expression changed subtly. "Why are you walking alone then?" I didn't answer. Instead, I quickened my pace, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. He matched my speed, staying right beside me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scanned the street for help. Ahead, I spotted a house with an open garage where an older man sat. Without thinking, I sprinted toward it. "Someone's following me," I gasped to the man in the garage. "Please help me." The garage owner immediately stood up and confronted my pursuer. "Foff," he shouted. "I have a gun." The man who had been following me retreated quickly to his car and sped away. I thanked the garage owner profusely. He simply nodded and told me to stay safe. That night, I ran all the way home, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what might have happened if that garage hadn't been open. For context, my husband and I live in the second-floor apartment of a 3-family home. Our entrance is inside a covered porch area, with stairs that are somewhat hidden. You wouldn't know where our door is unless you already knew. Yesterday, an older man with white hair knocked on our door. My husband answered, and the stranger immediately launched into a story about moving into the vacant apartment in the back of our building. "Your landlord said I could wait and move in May," he explained, claiming he'd put down a deposit. This immediately struck us as odd. We know our landlord well, and there's no way she would leave an apartment vacant for months. The man began asking invasive questions about our utility bills, our landlord's full name, and her general demeanor. My husband, thinking this might actually be our new neighbor, answered politely. Then the conversation took a disturbing turn. The man noticed my husband's accent and asked pointedly, "Are you a citizen in this country?" When my husband confirmed that he was, the man launched into a tirade about how it's a good thing illegals are getting deported. He began probing about our political affiliations, creating an increasingly uncanny atmosphere. As he finally left, he called back over his shoulder, "I hope you voted for Trump." Unnerved, we immediately texted our landlord. Her response confirmed our suspicions. "I don't know him. A young mom is renting that apartment." Today, the man returned. We've since installed a door camera and captured him on video. We still don't understand who this person is or what he wants. Is he just a confused elderly man? Or does he have sinister intentions? Particularly toward interracial couples like us. The thought that he specifically sought out our hidden apartment fills me with dread. What does he really want from us? I was 20 years old, naive, and probably lucky to be alive after this encounter. It was summer, and I was walking through a rough neighborhood wearing shorts and a tank top, being very thin. I'd been mistaken for a sex worker more times than I care to admit, a fact that may be relevant to what happened next. I was on my way to pick up my son from daycare, when a truck full of men started catcalling and following me. They circled around several times, yelling obscenities from their windows. Just as my anxiety was peaking, a man in a nice car pulled up beside me at a gas station and offered me a ride. He didn't seem threatening. In fact, he was quite attractive, so I accepted. Looking back, I want to reach through time and shake some sense into my younger self. Once inside his car, I told him my destination was about a mile straight down the road. He immediately drove in the opposite direction, claiming he needed to turn around. I didn't question it. As we drove, he asked about my life. I told him I was escaping domestic violence and staying at a women's shelter nearby. I explained how closely my activities were monitored and emphasized that I needed to pick up my son very soon. This information, my supervised schedule, and a child expecting me may have saved my life. At some point, I noticed he'd taken another wrong turn. When I mentioned it, he casually said he was taking a shortcut. I accepted this explanation and continued chatting, oblivious to the danger. Then I noticed a smell, a distinct, sickening odor that I now recognize as decomposition, the smell of death. I turned to look in the back seat, searching for its source. The car was immaculately clean. Not a wrapper, not a crumb, nothing. What is that smell? I asked, unease growing in my stomach. He shrugged it off, changing the subject. But the odor grew stronger, filling the car with its nauseating presence. Seriously, what is that smell? I pressed. Don't know, he said dismissively. Probably something I forgot to take out that went bad. But there was nothing in that spotless vehicle that could explain the smell of decay. Eventually, he dropped me safely at my destination. He didn't ask for my number or give me his name. I thought little of the encounter until years later, when I encountered that same distinctive smell in a different context, and immediately recognized it for what it was: decomposition. The memory of that car ride came flooding back with terrifying clarity. I'm convinced now that somewhere in that pristine vehicle, perhaps the trunk, was something or someone dead or dying. I believe the only reason I walked away from that encounter was because I'd established that people were expecting me at a specific time and place, and that my movements were being tracked. The man calculated that I wasn't worth the risk. This happened in 2019 when I was 16, living in a large North American city. I'm sharing it now because I'm still trying to make sense of what happened, whether I narrowly escaped human trafficking or something else equally sinister. It was late December, a few days before Christmas. I had just finished hanging out with friends and was taking the subway home alone. It was around 8 or 9 p.m., already dark outside, and the subway cars were mostly empty. I was sitting by myself when a young man sat down in the seat perpendicular to mine. He greeted me with a warm smile, and I couldn't help noticing how attractive he was. Chestnut hair in a stylish middle part, tall, slim, with striking facial features. He was well dressed in a sweater and jeans, nothing about him setting off immediate alarm bells. He introduced himself as Ben and started making small talk. When he mentioned finishing university, I asked his age. He said he was 24, which seemed to match his appearance. I told him I was 16, expecting that to end his interest. Disturbingly, he wasn't fazed at all. Instead, he grinned and spoke about missing his youth, advising me to stay in school with an unsettling smirk. He began questioning me. What was I doing on the subway? What had I been doing earlier? Did I have plans for the next few hours? I naively answered that I didn't have plans. That's when he shared a bizarre story. His friends had supposedly dared him to bring a random stranger to their gathering. He had to approach someone on the subway and convince them to come along. I expressed skepticism and repeatedly declined, saying I needed to go home and my mother would be worried. He became increasingly persistent, claiming it was a rare gathering. He hadn't seen these friends in ages, and wouldn't see them again due to his busy schedule. He promised if I felt uncomfortable, he'd bring me right back to the subway station. Eventually, against my better judgment, I agreed. I still can't believe I did. We traveled several stops and exited in a neighborhood I later learned was notorious for drug use, poverty, and prostitution. As we walked, Ben revealed his real name was actually something different. A Slavic name I suspected was also fake. His questions became increasingly invasive. What are your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? Why did you decide to come with me? He claimed to enjoy getting to know people beyond surface level, but his intensity was unsettling. About 15 minutes into our walk, a car slowed beside us and the driver called out. Ben quickly shooed him away, then casually informed me that the man was a John, a term I didn't understand at the time. We finally arrived at a townhouse where 5 or 6 men, all appearing to be over 25, some over 30, were gathered. They immediately asked my age, and when I said 16, one commented, "Come on, man. That's my sister's age. They might even be in the same school." They all laughed it off and never mentioned it again. The house appeared to be owned by someone's father. An elderly man was dozing on the couch. The host served food, but I refused to eat, feeling increasingly uneasy. After dinner, we went upstairs where Ben played guitar while another man accompanied him. The entire time I kept texting my friend about my situation and location. When I mentioned needing to leave, Ben insisted I stay, claiming the subway would be unsafe at night and offering his couch. I firmly declined, and thankfully he agreed to walk me back to the station. On our way, he suddenly suggested getting drinks at his apartment, completely disregarding my age. When I refused, his demeanor changed. He became pushy, insisting I should live a little. I kept refusing, and we eventually reached the station. Before parting ways, he asked for my phone number. Afraid of angering him, I gave it to him, but immediately blocked his number once I was safely on the train. Looking back, I shudder at how easily I was manipulated. The whole setup, the fake dare, the suspicious car, the group of older men, points to something sinister. Whether it was an attempted trafficking situation or some other predatory scheme, I'm grateful I escaped unharmed, though the experience continues to haunt